What would you do if everything you worked for was stolen, right in front of you because of your skin color? In today's story, we follow a young black woman who dared to step into a world not built to welcome her. She wasn't loud. She wasn't looking for trouble. All she carried was talent, dignity, and a secret legacy no one saw coming. But when the door slammed in her face, she didn't beg. She built a door of her own, and what happened next shook an entire industry. This is not just a story of injustice. It's a story of power, identity, and quiet revenge told with grace. If you're watching right now, let us know where you're tuning in from in the comments. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss what happens next. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this one ends. The wind blew hard against Clara's coat as she stood beneath the towering glass facade of Whitestone and Hartwell, the most prestigious architecture firm in the city. The building shimmered in silver reflections, pristine, cold, untouchable. It stretched so high into the cloudy Savannah sky that it made her feel smaller than she had in years. Still, her back remained straight. Her fingers clutched the leather, portfolio at her side like a lifeline. She had spent the night ironing her charcoal gray pantsuit and carefully braiding her hair into a neat bun. Her resume had been printed on thick linen paper. Her shoes were polished to perfection. The ink on her letter of recommendation from a former Oxford professor was barely dry. This was her shot. After years of working underappreciated in smaller firms, this interview was supposed to be different. Whitestone was known for shaping city skylines, for designing museums, libraries, and monuments of thought and culture. She belonged here. She had earned this. At 9 sharp, she stepped into the lobby. The marble floors glistened under fluorescent lights. Glass partitions separated sleek waiting areas where modern art hung in cold precision. Everything smelled like eucalyptus, an entitlement. A receptionist looked up. White, early 20s, glossy nails, condescending smile. "May I help you?" "Yes, Clara Johnson. I'm here for the junior architect interview. 9 o'clock with Mr. Whitestone." The receptionist blinked twice, then checked the screen. Something shifted in her face, a twitch of hesitation, a scan, a judgment. Clara felt it like static through her bones. "One moment," she said, and picked up the phone. Clara stood, shoulders square, heart pacing behind a calm mask. Around her, white men and women walked briskly in tailored jackets, whispering, in clipped tones, not one face like hers. From the hallway, he appeared. Matthew Whitestone, tall, trim, dark tailored suit, steel blue tie, and the kind of jawline that had likely been used in past marketing campaigns. His shoes clicked like exclamation marks on the floor. He stopped when he saw her. His smile froze. "You're Clara Johnson?" His voice dropped slightly, as if trying to smooth over something he couldn't hide. "Yes," she replied, extending her hand. He didn't take it. Instead, his eyes darted to the receptionist, then back to Clara's face. A long pause hung between them like a curtain of glass. This won't take long." He turned without waiting and walked toward the glass meeting room. Clara followed, her heels too quiet on the marble, her pulse too loud in her ears. Inside the room, he motioned for her to sit but didn't sit himself. Instead, he closed the glass door and adjusted his cufflinks. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he began, voice flat. "You weren't selected." Clara stared at him. "But I was called in for a final interview. I have the email confirmation. I flew in for this." His jaw tightened. "That was before we met." The air in the room turned sharp. Her lips parted, but words stalled. He continued, softer now, as if feigning pity. "Look, you seem like someone with drive. You speak well. But our firm, our clients, are very particular. We represent a certain aesthetic." "Aesthetic," she repeated. He avoided her eyes. "It's not personal." Clara's voice cut in, calm but precise. "You mean I'm not white?" Matthew stepped back slightly. "That's not what I said." "But it's what you meant," she said, her hands folded tightly in her lap. From the hallway, through the glass, a man passed by. Mid-30s, rolled-up sleeves, dark vest, holding architectural blueprints. He glanced in. His eyes met Clara's for just a second. Curious, focused, unreadable. Then he moved on. Henry Dalton. She didn't know his name yet, but she remembered his expression. Not surprised, not disgusted, just measuring. Back in the room, Matthew was unraveling. We work on heritage buildings, Clara. Clients want familiarity, trust. And when they walk into a meeting, they expect to see someone who doesn't look like me, she finished. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. You must understand. We can't change how the world works overnight. You should apply somewhere that embraces diversity. I'm sure there's funding for that. The insult landed like a slap, disguised as a favor. Clara stood. You didn't even look at my portfolio, she said. Matthew shrugged. There's no need. She opened the folder anyway, pulled out a single design, a recreation of the historic Bethel Street Library, but with modern spatial logic, sustainable structure, and hand-sketched detail worthy of publication. She laid it on the glass table. This design won an award. Berlin. The jury thought it was classic. He glanced at it. A flicker of something, recognition, discomfort, but he looked away. Good day, Miss Johnson. He opened the door. Not a handshake, not a thank you. As Clara walked out, her spine stiff, her throat tight, she passed the same man again, Henry. This time his eyes lingered. She made it to the sidewalk before the burn in her chest threatened to break. She didn't cry, she didn't break. She simply pulled out her phone and looked up. Local architectural competitions, Savannah, Georgia. If they wouldn't open the door, she'd find another way in. The coffee tasted burnt. The paper cup sweated in Clara's hand as she sat on a metal bench 2 blocks from the firm that had just spit her out. The sky above was gray, like wet. Concrete, thick and unyielding. Her phone buzzed with flight updates, hotel reminders, and job boards she'd bookmarked in panic. None of it mattered now. She had taken 3 years building up to that interview, and in 3 minutes, Matthew Whitestone had reduced it to nothing more than not our aesthetic. She closed her eyes. For a second, her breath trembled. Then she inhaled slowly, deeply, steadily. Not here. Not now. Across the street, city workers were replacing old signage in the historic district. Their ladders leaned against cracked brick walls, the past flaking off in red dust. Clara watched them scrape and chip at names that had stood for generations. Change was possible. Sometimes you just have to tear through layers. She pulled out her tablet. There was one competition left open, an urban renewal project for Bethel Ward, the oldest black neighborhood in Savannah, now threatened by gentrification. The city had invited conceptual proposals to redesign key spaces without erasing history. Clara tapped, apply, deadline, 72 hours. She already knew the site, Bethel Library, once the only place where black children were allowed to read. Its structure had been gutted in the 1980s. All that remained were marble steps leading nowhere and graffiti-stained pillars wrapped in vines. That night, Clara didn't sleep. She sat up on the floor of her motel, sketches spread around her, like a paper storm. Pencils, rulers, erasers. Lines were her first language, before fear, before race, before rejection. She didn't redesign the library. She resurrected it. The roof curved like open hands. The facade held fragments of the original brickwork, reclaimed and restructured. The interior used natural light in cascading rhythms, like hymns. She named the piece Remembrance. By dawn, her hands ached, her eyes burned. But the plan, it breathed. She hit submit without hesitation. 2 days passed, then an email arrived. Preliminary selection, Bethel Ward Project, top 3 submissions. They didn't know her name yet. All entries were judged blind. They only saw the lines, and the lines had spoken for her. Still, she didn't celebrate. Not yet. That afternoon, she walked into the public design forum held at the Historic Society Hall. Architects and reviewers mingled with donors. Clara kept to the side, ears sharp, eyes watchful. Her design was displayed on a mounted board under the pseudonym CJ27. Two men stood before it. One of them was Henry Dalton. She recognized him instantly. He didn't carry himself like the others. No designer arrogance, no champagne posturing. Just sharp eyes, sleeves rolled up, calloused fingers tracing the blueprint from edge to edge. He leaned closer to the glass. "Where have I seen this curvature before?" he muttered. The man beside him chuckled. "Looks like something. From the Moore School archives." Henry didn't laugh. He stared deeper, lost in thought. Clara stiffened. Moore. The name wasn't in her application. It was in the lines. Because deep in her bones, she hadn't drawn from imagination. She had drawn from memory. After the forum, she walked back to the motel. Her mind churned faster than her footsteps. The Moore School. Elijah Moore. Her great-grandfather. The man who taught her how light bends through space when she was 6. Who had died before she was 10. Who had once been called the Black Rite. But history erased him. Or maybe someone erased him. She opened the old trunk again, the one she had carried since college. Tucked beneath clothes was a faded envelope marked E. Moore, personal property. Inside, sketches, letters, a half-finished model of a community center that had never been built. In the corner of one drawing, a small notation, Bethel Library. June 1948. Clara's hands shook. The design she submitted wasn't hers alone. It was a ghost, and the ghost had called out from the paper, uninvited but undeniable. Suddenly, her coincidence felt like fate. She took photos of every document, scanned the letters, dated the watermarks. Then carefully, she opened her laptop and researched. Whitestone and Hartwell had, decades ago, won a federal commission for the Bethel Renewal Plan. The original plans were destroyed in a fire. But Clara now had a sketch signed by Elijah Moore that predated their patent by 6 years. Something wasn't right. She scrolled deeper. There it was. A 1981 interview archived in local papers. Matthew's grandfather boasting about restoring the Bethel site with a design uniquely their own. She compared the image from the article with Elijah's drawing. Same angle, same foundation, same curvature of light. She felt her stomach tighten. Theft, whitewashed and sealed in ribbon. They hadn't just stolen the project. They'd stolen her bloodline's legacy. And now, Henry, who had stared at her lines with recognition, not suspicion, was the only one who seemed to notice. The only one who might know the truth beneath the floorboards of history. The next morning, Clara returned to the exhibit. This time, she waited until Henry was alone. He stood again before CJ27, frowning at the structure's mathematical rhythm. "Beautiful work," Clara said, stepping beside him. He turned, no surprise, just an observation. His gaze flicked from her eyes to her shoulders, to her calm. "You designed this?" Clara didn't flinch. "What if I said I did?" He nodded slowly. "Then I'd say you've read more than books." She watched him carefully. "You know Moore's work." "I was a student of it," he said, "but only on paper. It's rare to meet someone who speaks it fluently." Clara didn't smile. She didn't need to. Not yet. Rain slicked the streets of Savannah as Clara stepped into the cramped motel room, the air inside stale with dampness and silence. The smell of wet carpet, old fabric softener, and her rising urgency filled her, lungs like smoke. She dropped her keys on the nightstand and locked the door behind her. Twice. The world outside felt colder now. She hadn't just stumbled into something personal. She had walked straight into the bones of a buried war. Her mind flashed back to the forum, Henry's gaze lingering not in judgment, but in recognition. The blueprint had spoken to him, and why wouldn't it? It wasn't just design. It was history folded in ink and memory. Her hand might have drawn the lines, but the soul behind them belonged to Elijah Moore. She knelt beside the wooden trunk near the foot of the bed. Old, scratched. Oak hinges rusted with time. The kind of trunk people walked past without noticing. But to Clara it was heavier than it looked, heavy with memory, heavy with silence. Her grandmother had left it to her without explanation. Just a whispered, "One day you'll know what to do with it." Tonight was that day. She opened it slowly. The hinges groaned. Inside, layers of faded linen, yellowing sketchbooks, a cracked leather folio, and, nestled at the bottom, a steel box with a name engraved in thin serif font, E. Moore. Clara sat on the carpet, legs folded, the box balanced, on her knees. Her fingers shook as she lifted the latch. Inside, brittle papers were stacked neatly. Some were tied with string, others wrapped in muslin cloth. Each one marked with dates, project names, and even inked initials that had long been forgotten by the industry. The first was a blueprint for a church in Mississippi, dated 1943. The second, a museum. 1951. And then she found it. Bethel Library. Billionaire 1, 1948. Her heart stopped. She held it up to the light. There it was, the curvature, the exact dimensions that had burned into her subconscious all these years. She hadn't just recreated his work. She had remembered it. Suddenly, something slipped from between the pages. A letter, folded twice, addressed to the City Council of Savannah. The ink had faded, but was still legible. "I submit these. Designs under protest, as I've been informed that my name will not appear on the public record. I was told this would ensure the project is accepted. I disagree, but I choose my community's access over my credit. Still, I keep this for my family. They must know the truth." Clara stared at the final line, her throat tightening. "One day, someone will come back and finish what I started." Her breath caught. Her hands trembled. It was her. She was the one meant to finish this. She spent the next 2 hours cataloging the documents, taking photographs, scanning every page with her phone, uploading to encrypted cloud storage. She didn't trust paper anymore, not after what she now knew had been done. The knock came just past midnight. 3 sharp raps. Clara froze. She checked the peephole. No one. Another knock, louder this time. She backed away, quietly slipped the folio under the mattress, then moved to the window. A shadow shifted in the parking lot. A man in a dark coat stood by the motel office, speaking to the night manager. She couldn't hear them, but the man gestured toward her room. Her pulse quickened. She grabbed the documents, stuffed them back into the trunk, locked it, and hauled it toward the bathroom. Tucked it behind the shower curtain. Not safe, but hidden. By the time she stepped outside, the man was gone. The next morning, she drove across town to see someone she hadn't spoken to in years. Professor Alan Monroe. Former architectural historian. Now semi-retired, I work as a consultant for the Savannah Historical Records Office. He lived in a creaky Victorian house tucked between 2 restored townhomes, overrun with books and cats. He answered the door in slippers, his gray, beard uncombed, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. "Clara Johnson? As I live and breathe. I need you to verify something," she said, holding up the box. Inside his study was chaos. Drafting tables buried under folders, coffee mugs next to antique compasses, old blueprints taped to walls like museum relics. She laid out Elijah's documents carefully. Silence followed. Professor Monroe leaned over, glasses perched on the edge of his nose. He touched the paper like it was sacred. "Elijah Moore," he whispered. "I spent 20 years chasing rumors about him. No firm ever listed his name. No project credits, nothing solid. I thought he was a myth." "He wasn't," Clara said. "He was my great-grandfather." The old man sat back, stunned. "You don't know what you have here," he murmured. These documents aren't just records, they're proof of historical theft. And not just any theft. This affects entire structures still standing today. If this gets out... He didn't finish the sentence. Clara did. It changes everything. His eyes narrowed. Does anyone else know? Maybe one, she said carefully, and someone else might be watching. Monroe nodded slowly. Then you'll need to move carefully. Start with legal documentation, then make it public, but only when you're protected. She exhaled. Will you help me? He smiled faintly. I've waited my whole life to bring Elijah Moore into the light. Yes, I'll help. When Clara returned to the motel that night, the front desk clerk handed her a note. No name, no contact. Just 3 words, well, you were seen. She didn't panic. She didn't sleep either. Instead, she sat by the window with a cup of black tea, eyes fixed on the parking lot below. The silence no longer frightened her, because now she had something stronger than fear. She had the truth, and the truth didn't tremble. The call came on a Wednesday morning, cloaked in politeness and laced with poison. Good news, the voice from the city council said. Your submission CJ27 was exceptional, but we regret to inform you that the committee has made a change. The final concept for Bethel Ward will now be presented by Whitestone and Hartwell. Clara gripped the phone tightly. You're saying, they're presenting my design. Well, it's been slightly refined for execution, he said, voice suddenly rehearsed. They're an established firm, you understand. These kinds of projects require experience. She didn't answer. Her silence stretched so long that the man cleared his throat and hung up. The line went dead. Her lungs didn't move. Not again. Not this time. She opened her email. A digital press release was already circulating. Whitestone and Hartwell. Selected to lead Bethel Renewal Project. Below the headline, a concept rendering. Her concept. The same lines, same light curvature, same material selections. Only slightly edited, sterilized. Her grandfather's design, her submission, now paraded as someone else's vision. Matthew's name is listed as lead architect. Her chest tightened with something cold. Not rage, not sadness, calculation. She didn't scream. She saved the article, downloaded the render, created a backup folder labeled theft. Then she stood, went to the bathroom sink, and splashed water on her face. The woman who looked back in the mirror wasn't the one who cried outside a glass building 2 weeks ago. This woman was done playing nice. That evening, Savannah's Historic Design Forum hosted a reception to celebrate the Bethel Project finalists. Clara wasn't invited, but Henry had sent her a message. You should come. She wore black, sleek, clean, deliberate. A dress that said presence without invitation. Her hair was pulled back tightly. A silver necklace her grandmother once told her had belonged to Elijah's wife. As she stepped into the event hall, heads turned. She moved past champagne flutes and tight-lipped smiles, her eyes scanning for one face. She found him near the back. Henry. Leaning against a tall marble column, arms crossed, glass of bourbon untouched. He saw her before she reached him, and gave a slow nod. Not a surprise, recognition. He didn't ask how she got in. He didn't need to. Instead, he said, You've seen the press? Clara's voice was steady. I left the press. Henry glanced around. You ready to shake a few pillars? Her eyes didn't waver. Just tell me where they're weakest. Matthew's voice boomed from the center of the room. He stood beneath a projection of the stolen design, gesturing with dramatic flair as he outlined the firm's vision for the neighborhood. This project is about honoring the past while embracing the future, he said. We believe in preserving Black history by elevating it into contemporary relevance. Clara's hand clenched. He wasn't preserving anything. He was packaging her grandfather's legacy in white applause. She stepped closer, arms folded, just within his peripheral vision. He froze. Their eyes met. A beat of silence passed. Then he recovered. In fact, he continued, we're excited to share a few early sketches. The screen changed. Clara gasped. The sketches weren't just similar, they were hers, page for page, line for line. Even her original marginal notations, removed digitally, but she recognized the structure beneath it all. The floor plans, angles, the use of reclaimed brick, the homage to the original library foundation. He had taken everything. Henry stepped beside her. That's more than coincidence. Clara whispered, that's bloodline theft. Matthew finished and descended the small stage, greeted by donors and developers. As he moved through the crowd, laughing, shaking hands, his smile dropped when he saw her. She didn't flinch. He approached, his low voice like venom. You shouldn't be here. And yet I am, Clara replied. His lips curled. You signed no rights. You submitted anonymously. No one knows who CJ27 is. Her eyes narrowed. But you do. He stepped closer. You think anyone here would believe you designed that? You're a motel-living intern who didn't even make it past reception. Clara's voice cut sharply. I have originals, drawings, dated, signed, stored, backed up in multiple states. Matthew's face twitched. She continued. And I've spoken to Professor Monroe and an attorney. He blinked. Everything your firm did, what your grandfather did to Elijah Moore, is coming out. His composure cracked. You have no proof. Henry stepped in. She does. Matthew turned. You're siding with her? Henry's tone was ice. I'm siding with the truth. People were beginning to watch. Matthew's voice dropped to a hiss. If you go public with this, you'll be buried. The firm has ties. The city will protect its own. Clara stared at him. Then they'll be exposed with you. He stared a second longer, then turned on his heel and stormed out. The crowd thinned. Whispers spread. Eyes followed her. She didn't care. Henry looked at her, breathing low. You just poked the hive. I didn't poke it, Clara said. I kicked it. They walked out together into the cool night air. Street lamps flickered above as they reached the edge of the square. Henry paused, his voice softer now. You knew that design wasn't entirely yours. Clara nodded. It came from somewhere deeper. I didn't realize how much of him lived in my hands. You're not just defending a blueprint, he said. You're reclaiming a legacy. She met his gaze. Will you help me? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a page, a scanned memo from 1982, Whitestone. Senior, marked confidential. At the top, Project Bethel. Use more sketches but remove the signature. Digitize, attributed to the internal team. Clara's breath caught. Where did you get this? Henry didn't blink. My uncle was part of the original digitizing. Grew. He kept a few things. He passed last year. I've been sorting boxes ever since. She stared at him. Henry said, You're not the only one with ghosts in the blueprints. Clara tucked the memo into her coat. The fight was no longer just hers. Now it had two voices. And the night, once cold and distant, suddenly felt full of possibility. The bell above the door let out a dull chime as Clara stepped into Delancey's, a quiet tea house tucked between a law office and a worn-out antiques shop near River Street. The sign was modest, the lighting dim, but the scent inside was warm. Black tea, old wood, and something citrus, the kind of place that carried whispers better than noise. She chose a table in the corner, back to the wall, facing the entrance. A survival habit. Her trunk with Elijah's papers was locked away at Monroe's for now. But the pressure hadn't gone anywhere. If anything, it had gotten heavier. The stolen design wasn't a theory anymore. It was documented, filed, and confirmed. But exposing it meant something bigger than architectural credits. It meant war. And she needed allies. Henry arrived 7 minutes late. No apologies, just that quiet, steady gait of a man who knew when to observe and when to strike. He wore a gray sweater, sleeves rolled to the elbows, a pen clipped to his collar. No pretense, just presence. He slid into the seat across from her, set down a manila folder between them, and nodded to the waiter. Darjeeling. No sugar. Clara arched a brow. You strike me more as a bourbon guy. I was. Now I like clarity more than numbness. She didn't smile, but something in her shoulders eased. The folder sat between them like a landmine. He didn't open it, not yet. Instead, he looked her dead in the eye. They're going to fight dirty. I'm not surprised, Clara said, reaching for her cup. But I've spent my entire life cleaning up messes I didn't make. He leaned back, arms crossed. The question is, how far are you willing to take this? She met his stare without flinching. As far as the truth takes me. The waiter returned with 2 steaming cups. Henry added nothing, stirred nothing. Clara let her tea sit, untouched. Henry finally opened the folder. Inside, copies of internal memos, building permits, and city council correspondences, all showing Whitestone and Hartwell's long-standing manipulation of heritage projects. Some were subtle, language changed to hide original authorship. Others were blatant, blueprints scanned with signatures cropped out. Clara traced one of the signatures with her finger. E. Moore. Still invisible, even after all these years. I found these in the firm's archived storage, Henry said quietly. They weren't supposed to be kept. My uncle was meticulous. He never trusted anyone to destroy documents unless he burned them himself. Lucky for us, he got lazy in the 90s. Clara's jaw tensed. We have motive, we have theft, we have lineage, but the city still won't listen until they're forced. Do we? They'll say your design was a coincidence, that Elijah's influence was general, that there's no legal precedent. She picked up her tea. It had cooled. I don't want precedent, she said. I want pressure. Henry nodded slowly. You'll need more than files, you'll need leverage. Clara's mind raced. She knew what that meant. Faces, names, people who could speak, who remembered, who had seen Elijah Moore not just as a myth, but as a man. Her grandmother. She had lived through it. She dug into her bag and pulled out a photograph, faded at the edges. Clara was 4, a wrinkled hand on her shoulder, a man with kind eyes behind them. Not Elijah, but someone close. I think this man used to work for the city's planning office, she murmured. He came to dinner once a month. My grandmother called him Louis. Henry took the photo. I know him, Louis Ambrose. He's still alive, nursing home in East Savannah. Retired in '98. Knew everything before digital. I need to see him. I'll take you. They left the tea house in silence. Outside, the wind had picked up. Gray clouds settled low over the rooftops. Clara tightened her coat as they walked to Henry's car, a silver sedan, clean but worn, dashboard cracked slightly from years of sun. The ride was short. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say until they saw him. The nursing home was beige and quiet, sunlight creeping through lace curtains in the lobby. A nurse escorted them down the hall to a private room. Louis sat in a recliner, wrapped in a flannel blanket. His eyes were cloudy but alert. He didn't recognize Clara, but when she showed the photo, his fingers twitched. I remember this girl, he said hoarsely. You're Margaret's grandchild. Clara stepped forward, and Elijah Moore's great-granddaughter. His eyes widened. Lord, have mercy, he breathed. You look just like him. Same jaw, same fire. She knelt beside his chair. Did you know him? I did more than know him, Louis said. He designed the Bethel Library, the original. He drew the plans by candlelight in my kitchen. They stole it, took it from him. Told him if he spoke out, he'd never work again. Said it was for the greater good, that it needed a white name to get funding. Henry stood still in the corner, a silent witness. Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. "Do you have anything written, signed, something we could use?" Lewis's hands shook as he pointed to a drawer. "Back there, bottom, red folder, I kept it, just in case." She opened the drawer. Inside, a letter from Elijah, a copy of the original submission, and a statement Lewis had written but never filed, dated, signed, sealed in truth. Clara's hands trembled as she held it. "Why didn't you come forward?" she asked. Lewis's voice cracked. "Because I was afraid and tired, but you're neither. You can finish what he started." Clara nodded, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. As they walked out, the folder pressed against her chest, Henry broke the silence. "You just gained your first witness." Clara exhaled. Not witness, co-author. They reached the car. She looked over at him. The wind caught a strand of her hair and whipped it across her face. He reached out gently, tucked it behind her ear, then pulled back quickly, unsure. She didn't move, didn't blink, just said, "Let's bring it down, brick by brick." The gallery buzzed with champagne voices and slow jazz. On the walls, renderings of future Savannah shimmered under recessed lights, buildings of steel and glass, clean-cut visions of progress. But Clara saw only facades, paper-thin masks stretched over stolen bones. She stood at the edge of the room, unnoticed, unread, until someone whispered, "Is that her?" A ripple passed, heads turned, eyes slid, but no one approached. She didn't need them to. She hadn't come to be seen. She had come to be heard. The Bethel Renewal exhibit was the city's showcase of its next step forward, a celebration of architectural innovation and cultural restoration. The Perfect Lie. Whitestone and Hartwell were headlining the event. Matthew, of course, had orchestrated it all. Press, sponsors, even a local television crew. All of them are here to capture him as the visionary of inclusion. A man honoring the Black past with modern empathy. Clara wanted to vomit, but she didn't. She adjusted the silk scarf around her neck, the one her grandmother had given her on her 21st birthday. Beneath it, the necklace still pressed against her skin, Elijah's initials etched on the back. She looked down at her shoes, black leather, polished, the same pair she wore to her first university interview. They'd carried her into rooms like this before. They'd carry her through this one. Beside her, Henry moved with quiet certainty. Not an accessory, not a savior, a shield, a witness. His suit was simple but sharp. His expression is unreadable. "You sure you want to do this here?" he asked under his breath. Clara didn't blink. "They stole everything in a room. Like this. I'll take it back in one." Across the gallery, Matthew stood beneath the largest screen, surrounded by city officials and aging developers. His voice floated over the crowd like polished brass. This was drawn over 75 years ago, before most of us in this room were even born. A large projection appeared behind him. The new Bethel Library design, Clara's design, Elijah's foundation. Stolen curves presented as tribute, and beneath it the Whitestone logo. "Ladies and gentlemen," Matthew continued, "this work is the product of vision, discipline, and deep respect for the community's heritage." "Funny," Clara said, loud enough now for heads to turn, "how respect always seems to arrive too late." The room shifted. Matthew froze mid-sentence. People turned. Clara stepped forward. Not rushed, not theatrical, just present. "Wonder," she said, voice clear, "how many of you know that the man behind this vision isn't the man you think?" Murmurs. Matthew cleared his throat. "Miss Johnson, you are not on the program." "No," she said, "but I'm in the story, and so is he." She pulled a document from her bag, aged paper, laminated for protection, the original 1948 Elijah Moore sketch. The same lines now paraded on the wall. A hush fell. For more than 75 years, his name was buried. Today, we pull it back into the light, by a man who died unknown. Not because he lacked brilliance, but because people like Matthew Whitestone decided his name didn't belong on buildings. Matthew laughed nervously. "This is absurd." This young woman has made several accusations without... Clara raised her hand. Without proof? You mean like this? She turned to the audience and clicked the remote Henry had handed her earlier. A second screen lit up. Scanned documents, memos from the firm, Louis Ambrose's signed statement, and the 1982 internal instruction to remove Elijah Moore's name. Gasps. One woman stepped back, hand over her mouth. This is doctored, Matthew snapped. Anyone can make something look old. Then ask Professor Monroe, Clara replied, pointing to the rear of the gallery. The old man stepped forward, slow, steady, holding a folder thicker than the one Clara carried. I authenticated these documents, he said firmly, and I've reviewed the building records. This firm has repeatedly erased Moore's contributions from multiple historical projects. A councilman interrupted. This can't be publicized yet. We haven't reviewed. You've had 75 years, Clara said. I've waited long enough. Matthew's face drained of color. You're doing this to destroy my name. No, Clara said, stepping closer. I'm doing this to restore his. She reached into her bag once more, pulling a framed photo. Elijah Moore standing in front of the original Bethel site holding a sketchbook. The same curvature is visible on the edge. This man, she said, voice quiet but lethal, drew this library while your grandfather tried to have him blacklisted. He signed his work in blood and silence, but his granddaughter, she signs in light. The lights flickered as if on cue. A reporter raised a microphone. Miss Johnson, are you pressing charges? Henry spoke now. We've filed a formal intellectual property claim and motioned for an injunction. If the city proceeds with Whitestone's version, they risk being complicit in historical theft. Then who owns the design now? Someone asked. Clara inhaled. I do, and Elijah Moore's estate. More murmurs. Matthew lunged. She's lying, he shouted, finger pointed like a blade. She's using a sob story to steal what we built. You didn't build it, Clara snapped. You whitewashed it, you digitized it, you called it yours. But the truth doesn't stay buried. Not forever. Security moved in. Officials began pulling Matthew aside. The audience fractured. Into clusters. Some arguing, some filming, others too stunned to move. Clara stayed still, calm, because she had one last card. I propose a solution, she said, raising her voice. The city creates a foundation in Elijah Moore's name, funds it with the budget originally allocated to Whitestone and Hartwell. The foundation supports minority-led restoration projects, affordable housing, and local design students. Then a councilwoman, tall, sharp-eyed, nodded. I'll back that. Clara turned to Matthew, who now stood alone, sweating, pale, jaw clenched. You wanted to use his name, she said. Now you'll pay to protect it. As she walked out of the gallery, Henry beside her, a young black girl near the exit, stared up at Clara like she had just seen a storm move mountains. Clara leaned down, handed her the printed sketch of the Bethel redesign. He drew it first, she said, smiling, but you can draw what comes next. Outside, the night was thick and cool. The silence that followed wasn't fear anymore. It was justice. In motion, the courthouse wasn't beautiful. Not like the libraries Clara loved. Not like the sacred geometry her great-grandfather had etched into blueprints under candlelight. This building was brutalist, windowless, made of poured concrete and cold in silence. It was built to intimidate. Clara walked through the front, doors with her chin high, her fingers wrapped tight around a leather-bound portfolio. She wore no makeup, no flair, just a navy suit and her grandmother's scarf. She didn't need decoration. She carried a legacy. Henry walked beside her, a legal pad in hand. His jaw was locked, eyes forward, suit darker than hers. They had rehearsed everything. Still, neither of them spoke. This wasn't the time for words, it was time for war. Inside, the courtroom buzzed. Journalists, council members, architects from rival firms, representatives from the Heritage Board. The public benches were full, but Clara didn't care who watched anymore. She wasn't there to be palatable. She was there to make history. Matthew sat at the defense table with his lawyers. Armani suits, polished shoes, thin smiles stretched too tight, but his eyes didn't rise when she entered. He stared down at a single sheet of paper, as if it could save him. It couldn't. Across the aisle, Clara placed her folder before the judge. Her fingers trembled once, then stopped. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Eleanor Wright, an older black woman with a reputation for intolerance toward pretense, took her seat. She wore no expression as she scanned the room. "Ms. Johnson," she began, "you're here as plaintiff in this case of alleged architectural intellectual property theft. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." "You're not represented by an established firm?" Clara straightened. "No, ma'am. I'm represented by evidence, legacy, and truth." A rustle passed through the gallery. Matthew's lead attorney rose. "Objection to the plaintiff's grandstanding." "Sustained," Judge Wright said, but her gaze never left Clara. "Proceed with facts, Ms. Johnson." Clara opened the folder and removed a single sheet. "This is the original sketch. The Bethel Library, drawn by Elijah Moore in 1948. He was my great-grandfather. The design used in the current Bethel Renewal Project, credited to Whitestone and Hartwell, is a near-identical replica, modified digitally, stripped of signature, and repackaged." She placed the copy on the evidence table. A large screen behind her lit up, side-by-side comparisons. Elijah's drawing and Whitestone's current rendering. Angles, measurements, proportions, indistinguishable. A ripple spread across the room. Judge Wright leaned forward. Matthew's attorney stood again. "The City Commission selected our firm through a blind process. Any similarities are coincidental or inspired by public records." Clara turned, cutting him off with a calm sharpness. "Except these documents weren't public. They were in a trunk in my family's possession for more than 75 years. We have no record of any archive ever logging them. That means this theft went unchallenged for more than 75 years. Judge Wright raised a brow. "Continue." Clara clicked the remote. More files appeared. Memos, letters, a scanned statement from Louis Ambrose, the notarized verification from Professor Monroe. She stepped aside. Henry took her place. "Your Honor, these are not abstract allegations. We have an internal firm memo, dated 1982, instructing staff to remove Elijah Moore's name from scanned archives to avoid funding complications. We have city correspondences verifying this." He held up the red folder Louis had given. "Them, and this," he added, "is the personal affidavit of the man who witnessed the theft, signed, sealed, never submitted, until now." Matthew shifted in his chair. Sweat lined his temple. Judge Wright read in silence. When she looked up, her voice was low. "Does the defense dispute the authenticity of these documents?" Matthew's lawyer rose, stumbling slightly. We dispute the intent. Mr. Whitestone was unaware of these memos. The actions were taken by his grandfather, long before he led the firm." Henry replied evenly. "Then why did Mr. Whitestone present the Bethel design as his own? Why did he refuse to acknowledge the original creator even after being confronted?" Silence. Clara stepped forward once more. "I submitted the original design to the city competition under the name CJ27. It was chosen anonymously. When the firm discovered my identity, my submission was quietly removed, and Whitestone's name replaced it." She paused. "Let the weight land. Not because it wasn't good enough, but because I wasn't white enough." Gasps. Matthew stood, rage slipping through his mask. "You don't know what it takes to run a firm. To get city approval, we had to present it our way. That design was never going to be approved under some dead name." Clara stared at him, calm as stone. Then it's a shame the dead still speak louder than you. Judge Wright struck her gavel once. This court finds merit in the plaintiff's claims. I hereby issue an injunction against Whitestone and Hartwell's use of the Bethel renewal design until a full investigation is complete. More murmurs, whispers, flashbulbs. The judge continued. Furthermore, the court recommends the city halt further disbursement of funds until an oversight committee reviews authorship, historical context, and appropriate reparations. Matthew sat slowly, his body deflating. Clara turned toward the gallery, eyes met hers, some with guilt, some with admiration, some with stunned silence, but no one looked away. Outside, reporters swarmed the steps. Ms. Johnson, what happens next? She stepped to the microphone, Henry beside her. Elijah Moore's legacy was never lost. It was buried. Now it's unearthed. What happens next is justice. Another voice rang out. Do you want the firm shut down? Clara shook her head. I don't want revenge. I want restoration. For every young black architect who was told their lines didn't fit the blueprint. For every name erased from the footnotes of history. She raised the original sketch above her head. We're rewriting what was written in stone. Later that night, Clara sat on the porch of her temporary home, Professor Monroe's guest house. The sketch lay beside her, now framed, resting on her lap. Henry brought out 2 cups of tea. No bourbon tonight? She asked, half smiling. Victory tastes better sober. He handed her the cup, then hesitated. You were brilliant. Today, Clara didn't respond immediately. Her eyes were fixed on the framed drawing. Do you think he knows? She asked softly. Wherever he is? Henry sat beside her. I think he's watching from every brick of that library. Every line you drew, every truth you told. She looked at him now, not as an ally, not as a partner, but as something more. What we did today, she said, was just the first wall. Then let's keep building, he replied. In the quiet that followed, their hands found each other. No dramatics, no music, just warmth. And the unspoken promise that some stories don't end, they echo. The old Maxwell carriage house had been gutted, scrubbed, and rebuilt. Its wooden beams were now sanded smooth, the cracked glass replaced by panes that shimmered in the afternoon sun. But Clara could still see the past in the walls, scars left behind by time, reminders that even strong structures carry wounds. She stood in the center of the space with a pencil behind her ear and rolled up blueprints in her arms. Dust clung to her sleeves, and her palms were marked with graphite and effort. Outside, hammers rang like clockwork as crews rebuilt what history had tried to erase. This wasn't just a restoration site. It was a resurrection. The Freeman Foundation was real now, funded by redirected grants and private donors, backed by the court order, and fueled by the very story that once nearly vanished. Its first project, converting the former Whitestone storage facility into a community architecture center, designed and led by Clara. Every inch of it was deliberate. The walls would carry names never printed. The shelves would hold works that had been buried. The space would be open to young architects who didn't fit the mold. Those too bold, too brown, too different. She walked to the open window and leaned her arms on the sill. The autumn wind swept in, lifting her curls. For the first time, in weeks her shoulders didn't ache with pressure. They hummed with purpose. Behind her, Henry approached, sleeves rolled to the elbows, dust on his collar. He held 2 mason jars of iced tea, the kind with mint leaves floating at the top. He offered one, then leaned beside her, their elbows brushing. You ever stop moving? He asked. I could ask you the same, she said, taking the glass. They drank in silence. Then quietly he added, You built something no court ruling could have given you, not just a win, a legacy. She looked down at the workers installing reclaimed wood across the main entrance, wood salvaged from the original Bethel Library, now part of something new. "It's not mine alone," she said. "It's his, and hers, and every voice." That got silenced. "You gave them sound again," Henry replied. Clara turned toward him. His gaze was steady but softer than usual. "I never asked why you stayed," she said. "I didn't have to," he answered. "The moment I saw your work, I knew it spoke to something forgotten. I just wanted to help you remember it." She smiled faintly, eyes tracing the lines of his jaw, the crease at his brow that never quite left, even when he laughed. He was quiet fire-controlled, focused but deep, reliable, and in a world of shifting floors he had been a beam she didn't know she needed. Henry set his glass down. "Stay after this," he said, voice low. "Keep building this with me. Not just the center, everything." Her breath caught, not because she hadn't seen it coming, but because hearing it made it real. "I don't want to be another reason you're tied to this place," she said. "You're not," he replied. "You're the reason it means something now." The words didn't come easily for either of them. They had spoken strategy and law, anger and justice. But this was the unspoken thing they'd been circling since the courthouse steps, since the tea house, since the day he tucked a stray curl behind her ear without thinking. Clara set her glass beside his and stepped closer. She rested her hand on his chest, just above his heart. "I'm not good at stillness," she said. "Then we'll move forward," he whispered. He leaned in, slow enough to ask. She met him halfway. The kiss wasn't perfect. It was layered, tense, soft, uncertain, but rooted in something earned, in trust forged through war, in admiration built over blueprints and battle lines. When they pulled apart, the wind outside had died. The workers had paused, voices low, tools resting. But inside, in that open room beneath wooden beams and sunlight, everything felt louder, alive. They sat on the edge of the drafting table together, legs swinging slightly, hands still loosely entwined. "Do you think people will forget this?" Clara asked. "No," Henry said. "Not this time, because now the story's in your hands." She tilted her head. "Ours." They stayed there as dusk crept in, golden light filtering through the tall windows, casting long shadows that stretched across the floor like roots. Outside, on the newly raised signpost at the gate, the final words had just been installed. "The Moore Dalton Center for Design and Equity." Below it, etched in bronze, "Built on truth, framed in dignity. Open to all." 6 months later, the city looked different. Not because the skyline had changed, but because people now looked up at it differently. The plaques told fuller stories. The buildings spoke new names. And for the first time, the name Elijah Moore didn't live in the shadows. Clara stood on the wide front steps of the newly restored Bethel Library, now renamed the Elijah Moore Community House. The morning sun hit the red brick just right, casting long lines across the lawn like lines. In a sketch measured, deliberate. Above the door, fresh gold lettering shimmered. Her grandfather's name, carved in dignity. Inside, children's laughter echoed off the high ceilings. Students in worn backpacks moved between bookshelves and drafting tables. Teenagers ran their fingers along wood panels reclaimed from buildings Elijah had once drawn. The space was alive, not in grandeur, but in purpose. Clara moved through the entry hall, her heels tapping softly on the polished floor. Every inch of the building had been reimagined not just for beauty, but for access. Rooms bore the names of architects and artists who had once been erased. Their stories are framed alongside their work, no longer forgotten, no longer footnotes. She paused in the central atrium where a sculpture now stood, bent steel curves rising like a flame from the ground. It wasn't decorative, it was structural. The metal had come from the ruins of Elijah's original Bethel structure, recovered during demolition. She'd insisted they keep it, not because it was strong, but because it had survived. Behind her, Henry approached, sleeves rolled, clipboard in hand. His smile was quiet, but it reached his eyes. It always had. They're already filling out applications, he said. First cohort of young designers arrives next week. She nodded, pride warming beneath her ribs. Did you ever think, he added, that the girl turned away from an interview would be here, owning the building, rewriting the history? She looked at him. I never wanted to own it, she said. I just wanted to tell the truth. He set down the clipboard. It does now. A bell chimed in the courtyard. Clara glanced out the window. A crowd was gathering by the new monument near the sidewalk, a bronze plaque embedded in stone surrounded by native flowers. She and Henry walked out together. The ceremony had already begun. The mayor was reading prepared lines, but Clara wasn't listening. Her eyes were locked on the plaque. This house stands in honor of Elijah Moore, whose vision was buried, then resurrected by his granddaughter Clara Johnson. Built not to impress but to include, not to silence but to speak. This house belongs to everyone who's ever been told they didn't belong. A few steps away, Matthew stood alone. No cameras, no supporters, just him, watching from a distance, hands in his pockets. His empire hadn't collapsed, but it had cracked. The firm had been fined, stripped of the Bethel project, and publicly reprimanded. His name now carried an asterisk, and that was enough. Clara didn't approach him. She didn't need to. Instead, she turned toward the children gathered on the grass, handing out sketchbooks and pencils. Their eyes are wide, curious, untouched by shame, still believing in blueprints, still thinking that lines could shape the world. She knelt beside one boy who asked, "Can anyone build something like this?" She smiled. If they believe they belong, yes. Later, as dusk fell and the crowd faded, Clara stood alone at the base of the steps. Henry joined her, 2 cups of tea in hand. I don't think people come here just for design anymore, he said. She nodded slowly. They come for truth, and truth had weight, not the kind that crushed, but the kind that grounded. She took his hand, fingers laced with purpose. Together they turned and walked back into the house that should have never needed proving, but now stood unshakable. Because once erased voices are heard, they don't whisper. They echo. What did this story stir in you? We'd love to hear your thoughts, your feelings, or your own experiences in the comments below. Thank you for staying with us until the final brick was laid. Stories like Clara's remind us that truth may be buried, but it always rises. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that reclaim dignity and rewrite what was once erased. Until next time, stay strong, stay seen, and never stop building what matters.